Hello and welcome back to Akamai TV. I'm Paul Jackson from Akamai, and we're going to talk around the interesting world of subtitling and access services. With me is Gion Linder,
Hello.
Head of Access Services from Swisstex.
Yes.
And we're going to dive into this fascinating space where we've got 360 million people globally who have a disability in hearing severe enough to impede their enjoyment of content. And there are a number of methods for helping them, and what we're really going to talk about here is the subtitling service, which you run for public broadcasters in Europe. So I think many of us take these services for granted, if we notice them at all. There's actually a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Run us through exactly how this tends to work, particularly for live broadcasts, obviously.
Well, for live broadcast, we use speech recognition because it's the easiest and fastest way to transform the what you say into text.
Right.
But in the US, for instance, they have a lot of stenotypers.
Right.
Because in the US, this is a common thing that is where you can create text. And there are also countries where they still have to use the old keyboard because there is no speech recognition software.
Right. And is that down to whether those countries can afford that, or is it because the speech recognition is, English, French, German, Spanish?
Exactly. It's the market. So
Right.
for the big languages, there is speech recognition software, whereas for Lithuanian, for instance,
Right.
there is no market.
And I think it's one thing we were talking about earlier was I think we talk about the deaf community and the valuable work that Subtitles offers for them, but increasingly also the rest of us are using subtitles when we're in noisy environments, or
Exactly,
watching
like here.
news in the gym, or even when you're watching news on a mobile phone. So actually the audience for subtitles is growing at a pace.
It's growing, yes, for many reasons. I think the main reason is because the population is eldering.
Yeah.
And it's very normal if you are 80 years old, you have a hearing loss.
Yeah.
That's absolutely normal. Then also I think one of the reasons is that people listen to the music too loud.
Yeah.
And you mentioned on the social networks, people are often outside watching their smartphones and tablets in a loud environment, and there they use the subtitles.
Right. That's interesting. And we also talked in the call before around public broadcasters and the sort of proportion of their live content that is subtitled. Just run me through some of those numbers in Europe, so sort of for the BBC or for the markets that you work in.
Well, the BBC or the UK
Right.
is still the motherland of subtitling and of access services. Because I think there is some awareness required that this technology is used.
Right.
So because it costs a lot, and there is no real market because the people, the deaf and the hard of hearing, they pay the television fee,
Yeah.
and it has to be funded by this money. And for small countries, this is a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for big countries like the UK, and especially countries with one of the big languages, it's not a problem.
Right.
So the UK, France, Germany, and also Spain, they guarantee almost all programs with subtitles.
Right.
Whereas in smaller countries, you still will find programs without subtitles.
Right. And this just to be clear, this is live content. The process for library content is slightly different, isn't it? It can be done sort of at the leisure of the broadcaster. prior
Yes,
to broadcast.
exactly.
And that library gets larger and larger over time as more and more of that content is subtitles.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But the process, how subtitles are produced, depends strongly from the program itself.
Right.
So is it live content? Is it news content, for instance, where you can find the text before in a newsroom system, or are we talking about series and films?
Right, right. Yeah, the other thing we touched upon was this idea of it seems obvious that if somebody's making a series, you should be able to get hold of the scripts. But that actually, you were saying, actually is often more trouble than it's worth compared to just actually subtitling it yourself.
Well, for a series, it might be useful, but because you have a series with 100 episodes, so it's just a work that has been done once. But just imagine you have to subtitle a film from, I don't know, from US maybe. You have to contact the producer. You don't know the producer,
right.
So it's simpler to just subtitle the program from scratch.
Right, right. Now, tell me about respeakers. This is something that I didn't know existed at all.
Really?
I really didn't. I mean, back to my original
Siri.
point. Tell me about their role in this process.
Well, here also the UK were those who started, I think, 15 years ago. Mainly also because the English language has the most developed respeaking software.
Right, right.
And I would say 10 years ago, also the respeaking software in other languages became better and better.
This is speech recognition.
This
software.
is speech recognition,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And also, I think universities across the continent started to skill interpreters in respeaking.
Right, right.
And that's why we started, I think, 10 or 9 years ago with respeaking first in Italian and then in German. And the latest were those in French, mainly because the French language is a very difficult one for respeaking.
Right, right.
But meanwhile, also the French live subtitles are very good.
Right, right. So this is just we're not translating here, although it's a lot of the same skills that these people have as simultaneous translators. They're basically taking accented or regional French, German, respeaking that in the pure language, High German or High French, and then feeding that into the speech recognition software, aren't they?
Well, it's not a classical translation, that is true, but in a way it is a translation because they shouldn't respeak that what is said verbatim.
Yeah, yeah.
What they should do is to omit redundancies because it's for the deaf community. Especially for the profound deaf, those who grew up deaf, the born deaf. It's very difficult to read. They often suffer from dyslexias, and so it's important to reduce the text as much as possible.
To its simplest element.
So the respeakers have to omit redundancies.
Right, right. And also, they're taking tone of voice into account. So things like irony.
Very difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
Very difficult.
If you start subtitling something that's being said ironic,
yeah,
without saying, irony or interpreting for it, that's baffling to somebody who's just reading the subtitles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because you cannot read the irony from the text.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to really, you have to explain this.
Yeah, yeah. No, I find that fascinating. We touched upon the profoundly deaf community as opposed to the hearing impaired. Now, the two systems I think everybody will be aware of is subtitling and signing.
Yes.
Now, they both have a heavy human element, whether it's the respeakers or the people on screen signing. Both potentially could have technology help that process. But take me through sort of what the challenges are for both of those camps and where the technology could help in the future.
Well, you mentioned the most important challenges for subtitling.
Yeah.
For the deaf, lots of people think that avatars could be a solution, and maybe one day they will be a solution. But so far, signing avatars are not accepted by the deaf community, since the face expression when you are signing is very important.
Right. Right.
And so far it's not possible to show these face expressions with an avatar.
So this is computer generated, on screen, characters signing effectively.
It's a way of translating text into signs.
Right, right.
But we are participating to a European project which is called Content for All, where we will try out puppeteering, which means that someone signs, a human being is signing,
right.
and this is transmitted into a kind of puppet with also with the face expressions. And there the advantage could be that the signer looks every day the same.
Right.
Or
right.
that the viewer can choose if she or he wants to see a male or female signer.
Right. So that's using some of the gaming world technology, the motion capture and the little dots on people's faces, things like that. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's another field where you're seeing a lot of AI, you're seeing a lot of bleed in from computer graphics or from the gaming space. Interesting that those can be put to not necessarily more worthwhile, but certainly into services that are beneficial to these communities to make sure that they are getting access to the content and understanding the content.
Yes, we more and more get involved in new technologies, and I think in the future the new technologies will be very useful also for access services.
Right.
The first one was the speech recognition technology.
Yeah.
Now everyone is talking about artificial intelligence, and I'm quite sure that this will also improve and reduce costs as well.
Yeah. I mean, we all know from having used Siri or Alexa, it's got a long way to go, though, hasn't it? You know,
it's still a long way to go.
If you're trying to use those, you're using very short key phrases and thinking about your wording. It's nowhere near close to natural language.
Exactly, and I have to point out that you couldn't use Siri for television purposes. Let's say that if someone is whispering in a series or even in a chat show, the text wouldn't be displayed correctly.
Yeah. And I guess the once you get to the point of subtitles, the next stage is potentially translation. So
yes,
we're again the AI vision, Babelfish. If you know Douglas Adams, you put something in your ear, somebody's speaking, or you're watching something on TV and it's simultaneously translating. That's the next stage down the line, isn't it?
It's the next stage, but I think it's already working. There are players where you can choose the language.
Right.
And since automatic translation is becoming better and better, I think in the future we can choose our own language on each player.
How long do you think before that kind of works?
It will happen very soon, I will tell you.
And is that the same for the respeakers role, or do you feel that that's going to continue for quite some time yet?
Well,
again, I guess it depends on the language, doesn't it?
It depends on the language, and there are some projects going on. For instance, I know a Spanish professor is organizing courses for interlingual respeaking.
Right.
But I'm not quite sure that in the future this will be useful, but because I prefer that someone does intralingual respeaking, and then this correct text is automatically translated into another language.
Yeah.
This is, in my opinion, is faster and also cheaper.
Yeah. I think it's one of the challenges that people have with a lot of AI technologies is things that seem simple to us, actually incredibly complex for an AI. Doesn't matter how much data you throw at it, it's still going to take a long, long time to get to the level of understanding that we have about spoken English or spoken Spanish or spoken German. I just want to touch again on this sort of the subtitles versus signing.
Yeah.
There are different audiences for those, effectively, aren't there?
Complete different audiences. So the profound deaf, they grow up with the sign language. By the way, there are lots of languages in Europe, and there are also lots of signing languages across Europe.
Right.
And they often suffer from dyslexia, so they have difficulties to read, and they prefer signing. Whereas hard of hearing grow up with the language, with the oral language, and they often don't know the sign language. And it's quite difficult to learn sign language when you are an adult.
Much like learning another language.
Exactly.
Exactly. Whereas if it's from an early
I would
age,
say it's more difficult because the grammar and the structure of the language is completely different.
And is that common across the multiple sign languages? You say there are also many sign languages. Do they all typically have the same structure?
Yes, you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice which languages you want to learn. And that there is also international signing, but this is not a real language. You cannot really express yourself in a very specific way.
Right.
But as you said, there are two technologies, and I think public broadcasters have to supply both.
Right.
So the main information should be provided for both, because there is the UN Convention for Persons with Disabilities. This is a self-obligation of all nations in Europe, which means they have it's a self-obligation, which means that the television have to provide accessibility.
Right.
People with a disability, with a hearing loss, they have to be able to follow the main information.
Right. Understood. Yeah, I'm talking to somebody this afternoon about sort of the public broadcaster obligations, and that's one very important element of that.
I think the difficulty is that televisions have to provide both.
Yeah.
And so it's also a matter of cost.
Yeah. And the more automated tools we can eventually apply there, at least reduce that cost. And potentially, optimistically, one would say you'd be able to increase the amount of content for the same cost, rather than necessarily drive down the cost hugely. Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent, John. Just to finish off, last question. Have you walked the show yet? Have you found anything particular? No, me neither.
But we can do it afterwards.
I just wondered if you'd seen anything particularly interesting sort of in your space or in the broadcast space on the show floor. You haven't as of yet.
I haven't yet, but I will do.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming on Akamai TV. I hope
it was a pleasure.
An interesting conversation. Thank you very much, John. We're going to take a break now. We'll be back at the top of the hour with me again, talking about piracy and streaming piracy with Friends MTS. Thanks for watching.